So Cole Hale manages the Georgia Room at the Charles D. Switzer Library in Marietta, Georgia. His research focuses on the Long Sixties, the Atlanta rock scene, and horror cinema. He earned a bachelor's in history education from Kennesaw State University and a master's in history from Georgia State University. He also earned a master's of library and information science with a graduate certificate in archival studies from Louisiana State University. He previously served as an Institute of Museum and Library Services Fellow at Drexel University. His master's thesis, Slouching Towards Atlanta, the Influence of Churches on Atlanta's Hippie Culture, explores how local church leaders influence the city's counterculture. Please join me in welcoming Cole Hale to the Georgia Archives.
Really quick, if I'm talking right here, can everybody hear me? If not, I can move to the microphone. I'm just tend to be very animated whenever I talk. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. My name is Cole Hale. My master's thesis, as he mentioned, is Slouching Towards Atlanta, the Influence of Churches on Atlanta's Hippie Counterculture. Whenever I was writing my thesis, I was sort of shopping it around and taking it to talks that I was doing all over the country. I presented on it in New York. I presented on it in Florida. There were these little things called 3-minute theses where you and a group gets together and you talk about it. And you try to get some advice from them. You see any gaps that are in your research. You get some suggestions for sources. And every single time I spoke about it, every time I went somewhere, all people asked at the end of it was, so wait, Atlanta had a hippie movement there? They didn't listen to what the actual story, I guess, or argument was. They were just more interested that Atlanta had a counterculture that nobody ever really talks about. So how many people in here are from Atlanta? Were you here during the 60s? Did y'all ever go by the Strip and see what was going on down there? Very cool. So yeah, this is going to be sort of an introduction to Atlanta's counterculture movement. My thesis advisor was John McMillan. I just have to throw him in here. I was talking earlier about how good of a professor he was. Whenever scholarship on the 60s first started coming out, it was pretty much all memoirs and autobiographies that people were writing. By the 90s, you have people that are sort of looking back and saying, okay, what happened then? How does it affect today? And then there was a third wave of historians taking everything and putting it together. And John McMillan was at the forefront of that third wave. So before we start, I do like to talk about some words that I use. There are the 1960s versus the 60s. So the 1960s is the literal decade, 1960 to 1969. Whenever I say the 60s, I don't really mean 1960 to 1969. I usually refer to the long 60s or the 60s as being synonymous with the Vietnam era. So when the U.S. took an active advisory role with the war in 1955, for the U.S. withdrawal in 1973, or the fall of Saigon in 1975. 1955 also marks the increase of civil rights activism with the death of Emmett Till and the Montgomery bus boycott. So really, when I say the 60s, I'm talking more about like a 20-year period rather than just a 9-year period. And so some other authors or scholars that I picked this up from, Lance Morrow, who is a famous writer for Time magazine, he said that the real 1960s began on November 22nd, 1963. What happened on that day? Kennedy assassination. There was such a shock to American culture. And then, of course, the ensuing questioning of governments that happened on November 22nd, 1963, that is when the actual 60s began. And I do sort of like that because studying, especially the hippie counterculture, you have the Beatles released their first real album in 1963. Well, Beatlemania began in England in 1963. It reached the United States in 1964. Ken Kesey, whenever he went on his psychedelic bus ride in the bus further, that was 1964. Huxley, who wrote The Doors of Perception about his psychedelic drug experience, He died that same day, but understandably, Kennedy's assassination, overshadowed that. But nonetheless, everything that when I talk about the hippies and the counterculture, it's really 1963. Usually to 1973, that's when I say that it ends, or whenever I like to think that it ends. But Mark Oppenheimer, he wrote a book called Knocking on Heaven's Door, and he has a really good point about the 1960s, or about the 60s, which is that it's not a very coherent concept, because what do we really associate with the 60s? When you think of the 60s, what comes to your mind?
Free love.
Free love. So looser attitudes towards sexuality. Playboy magazine came out in the 50s. Birth control came out in the 50s. Somebody else said something?
So the protest.
Motown and the protests, right? And the Montgomery bus riot. Montgomery bus boycotts. Death of Emmett Till, 1950s. Yeah.
Big protest.
Right. But the rumblings were beginning in the 50s. If we're going to talk about rock and roll music or just music in general, 1950s. So the idea of the 60s is not a very coherent concept. Nonetheless, 1963 to 1973 is usually when I talk about it. But I think we can all agree that America was clearly different in 1970 than it was in 1959. So where does the term hippie come from? Many believe that the term comes from the West African word hepicat, which means one who has his eyes open, one who is aware of what's going on. Now, some people say that being hip comes from everything from people that were smoking opium and therefore lying on their hip to do so. And because they were participating in something taboo, the phrase, "Are you hip?" meant, "Are you down with doing something taboo?" But we do know that by 1902, it was used in America to mean aware and informed. And for example, in Jim Hickey's A Story of One Night Stands from 1904, an African-American character asks, "Are you hip?" Also, a novel in 1914 reads, "He is an authority on French history of that period. In fact, he's as nearly hipped on the subject as a man of his powers can be considered hipped on anything." So is the counterculture a movement? Were hippies a counterculture or a movement? So just to go through these, a counterculture is a group that is wanting to change the predominant culture. A subculture is a group that is within a larger culture. A social movement is an organized effort for a group of people to change something about society. Usually there are defined leaders, goals, and tactics. And a community is a group of people with shared interest, values, and or goals. So where would you say that hippies fall between these four terms? Any particular?
Social movement, subculture.
Social movement and subculture, right? Yeah, that's exactly what. So whenever I defined it, I sort of include aspects of all those terms. This community, sometimes considered a movement, was a large, unorganized group of youths across the world who were disillusioned with the materialism of modern life. They sought to bring about a new age of Aquarius, an era more creative, spiritual, and free than had ever existed before. Hippies supported a myriad of sociopolitical causes, including civil rights, the anti-war movement, women's liberation, gay rights, and environmentalism. Instead of rallying and attending marches to persuade society to adopt these causes, the true hippie ethos was to drop out of society, meaning to simply not participate in society at all. The extreme manifestation of this came from those who formed communes, living out their idealized version of the future outside of mainstream society. Take a water break after reading all that. So, well, I said that the 60s, in the sense of the hippie counterculture, began in 1963. I'd say in Atlanta, it began on October 29th, 1965. Emory University held their first teach-in. Teach-ins were groups of students and faculties who faculty members who got together to raise awareness and to debate the Vietnam War with both hawks and doves represented. Meaning they weren't getting together to protest the war necessarily. They were getting together to just talk about the war. They weren't doing any kind of real activism. They weren't taking to the streets. But it was just to debate whether or not we should be involved with Vietnam. Then in early 1967, David Braden opened the Catacombs in the basement of his art gallery, the Mandorla. Did any of you ever go to the Catacombs? Here in Atlanta, yes.
Where was
This was at 14th and Peachtree. I think 14th and Peachtree. If it wasn't 14th and Peachtree, it was 10th and Peachtree. Did anybody who said that they were from Atlanta ever go to the Mandorla or to the Catacombs? Gotcha. So it was originally planned to be a bohemian coffee house that was really going to be geared towards folk music, but it changed to a psychedelic rock venue during the Summer of Love during 1967. One of the bands asked Braden where to set up his equipment, to which David Braden said, "Don't ask me, I'm not your mother." And it earned him the nickname Mother David. It was Atlanta's proto-hit. Usually whenever they referred to the counterculture in the newspapers, especially during the early years, they would mention him. Also, there was the 12th Gate. The 12th Gate opened in mid-1967 by Methodist minister Reverend Bruce Donnelly. The title or the name of it comes from a Bible verse that the New Jerusalem had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names were written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the son of Israel. It offered a tame variant of the counterculture, meaning if you went to the Catacombs, you were more likely to see the liquid light shows that go for it.
physical address of the 12th Gate?
It's right there, 36 10th Street. Yeah. Yeah, so if you went to the Catacombs, it was much more of the liquid light shows and Grateful Dead shows that you see on documentaries, whereas because of this, the Methodist ties that it had, they did have church service there every Sunday, and it was geared much more towards folk music. Also, 1967 marks the opening of Atlanta's first head shops, Middle Earth and Morning Glory Seeds, or Morning Glory Seed. These places sold materials to make sure you got the most when feeding your head, meaning taking LSD or smoking cannabis. But they also acted as a place to get off the street and to discuss drug legalization and Vietnam War and social issues. There's a really good book called From Head Shops to Whole Foods, where they talk about that, yes, they did sell drug paraphernalia, but they usually have rooms in the back where people could get together and get in a circle and just start talking about whatever kind of social issues were plaguing them that day. Also, it's important to start thinking about that. So during 1967, you've got psychedelic rock venues, you've got folk music cafes opening, you've got head shops, you've got 2 head shops opening up. So there's enough of a culture there's enough of an audience being built that these businesses can open up and thrive for a bit. And all of these locations made up the Strip. So this was a 6-block district on Peachtree, beginning at 8th that continued until 14th, with 10th and Peachtree being considered the epicenter. That's it right there. Many people would go and hang out at Piedmont Park and then come out and walk on 14th right there. And all the businesses and venues were all right there. And here's...
Does this area still exist?
The street still exists. It's definitely lost a lot of that countercultural vibe. Actually, I think the Fed is right. Yeah, right. Yeah, times have changed. And this is a scene from, I believe this is right where the Fed is currently now, actually. But look at the clothes or lack thereof from, look at the hair from the era. All right, so there's the Great Speckled Bird. It was an underground journal meant to be an alternative to the mainstream media. The first issue was on March 15th, 1968. If a protest happened, the mainstream media focused on the clothing. They would start writing about, a group of youths got together and they were smoking drugs. A group of youths got together and they smelt funny and their hair was messy. They didn't really say anything else, but the bird focused on the message. It would say that we got together to protest the war in Vietnam. We got together for the civil rights movement, and it focused solely on the purpose that was driving them to the protests. But they also advertised concerts, art shows, hip restaurants, and businesses, and featured comics. That's the first issue right there. Are there any readers in here of The Great Speckled Bird? Yeah. Did y'all ever, were y'all hawkers that would go out and sell them or anything? Oh, well. Okay, so hips versus straights. So life was kind of difficult to be a hippie in Atlanta. The catacombs were shut down, or the catacombs was shut down, it's a singular place. It's always confusing to me. For multiple violations, the last time being when Mother David gets arrested when codeine and cannabis are found at the club. He, I don't believe, was in actual possession of it. However, it was inside of his club. Therefore, he got the blame. And possession of cannabis wasn't, it was a big deal back in the day. So he gets sentenced to 7 years for that. The Middle Earth is closed as people stop visiting because police frisk people leaving. They are literally setting outside near the bushes or somewhere just obscured so that as people are walking out, they get frisked. This, of course, hurts business for a place that's selling drug paraphernalia. And many hip establishments, including the bird offices, are firebombed. So I don't like, even though I talk about hippies, I don't like branching into the world of conspiracy theories too much. However, Colony Square in Midtown was being built at this time, and there were literal stories of buildings. So you would have the birdhouse, a building to the left, it gets sold and gets demolished. Then birdhouse in the middle, then the building to the right of it would get sold and get demolished. The bird would refuse to sell their business. It got firebombed. And that became a common thing. Now, the papers say that it was rednecks that were, being cruel to the poor hippies and throwing firebombs there. But it is kind of a big coincidence that, most homes were selling and getting destroyed or getting demolished immediately after, and the ones that are left standing just happen to be the ones that get firebombed. Or they have faulty electricity and they called on fire themselves, or hippies were smoking their dope and fell asleep and caught the building on fire. Other trouble times are hippies are frequently arrested for loitering. There are stories of people literally sitting at a light waiting to cross. They're not wanting to jaywalk, but because they're just standing at an intersection, they get arrested for loitering. Bikers and rednecks venture into the strip to beat up hippies for fun, just something to do on a Saturday night. And hippies can't turn to the police either because of their own beliefs or because they're using drugs. So if you're walking on the strip, you've got a bag of cannabis in your pocket, a biker comes and beats you up and steals your money and your drugs, you can't run to the police and say, hey, he stole my drugs. So the police, and plus, their own moral beliefs that if the police are sort of the protectors of the ruling class or the middle class, then they don't want to turn to the police. And so things get pretty rough out there. But also, criminal hippies join their own ranks to steal, take drugs, and rape their drugged peers. Ed Sanders has a great quote about this. He says that hippies were plump white rabbits surrounded by wounded coyotes. Piedmont Park police riot. This happens in September 1969 after a summer of fire bombings and police raids on hippie homes and businesses alongside violent clashes of drunken rednecks visiting the strip to beat up hippies. The event began when George Nikas, a member of the counterculture, revealed the identity of a undercover police officer roaming the park. The police deployed tear gas into the crowd, and several fights erupted between police and the hippies. The riot resulted in the arrest of 23 people, and it was featured in Time magazine. Another riot breaks out. A riot breaks out on the Strip after a teenage girl is arrested for selling drugs. Windows were busted out and firebombs were thrown into hippie businesses, and gunfire is exchanged, including shots fired at police and by people in possession of snipers and automatic rifles. When I was writing my thesis, I interviewed somebody that was living in the Strip while this was going on. And I asked him, do you remember the October 1970 Strip riot? And he was like, which one? It felt like there was a riot every single day. And he had no memory of this, but he said that shootings and stuff became pretty commonplace over there. Tear gas was eventually deployed to clear out the scene. 26 people were arrested as a result. Georgia Governor Lester Maddox tours the area, and he describes the conditions as deplorable, saying that people are living like wild animals there. As a result, Maddox posts state narcotics agents on the 10th Street area. So to talk about this, there's actually still a police precinct that's over there. Sam Ezell, he was the mayor at the time, he makes a statement on the hippies and to residents of Atlanta saying that hippies are free to do what they please as long as they are not breaking any laws. He was getting calls in, girls aren't wearing bras or whatever the case may be. He said that they are free to do whatever they want as long as they're not breaking any laws. However, loitering, you're breaking the law. Jaywalking, you're breaking the law. So did this really help the community? Because of the increase of drugs and violence in the 10th Street district, Moselle establishes a police precinct on 10th Street with 64 police officers. Hippies did ask for assistance because things were getting so bad there. They even thanked him by sweeping the streets literally to clean up the area. But more people are getting arrested for crimes such as loitering. But let's talk about wins for the local hippie counterculture. So there's the first Atlanta Pop Festival. This was inspired by the Miami Pop Festival. Alex Cooley, does everybody know who Alex Cooley was? The music promoter, Music Midtown. We thank Kim because of it. Chastain Park, Kim. But he went to the Miami Pop Festival and he had such a good time that he wanted to bring the experience to Atlanta. I wasn't there for the 60s, but I've heard that Atlanta wasn't seen as being a very big concert town. You basically had concerts in Florida and Nashville. People would just sort of drive through Atlanta. With that said, there was the Atlanta Stadium where you would have some major artists. The Beatles came here. The Jimi Hendrix came here. But there was nothing for medium-sized artists at the time. So you could either play a bar to as many people are in this room, or you would go to the Atlanta Stadium and play in front of 25,000 or whatever that number is. There was nothing in between. But Alex Cooley really brought music to Atlanta. And the Atlanta International Pop Festival took place on 4th of July weekend, 1969. This is a month before Woodstock came. And the concert brought Creedence Clearwater Revival, Janis Joplin, Led Zeppelin, and many more to the city. After the concert, or after the pop festival, Alex Cooley was criticized by the city's hippies for profiting from the music festival. Therefore, he used almost all of the money that he made from it to pay for a free Grateful Dead concert to take place in Piedmont Park. Which, by the way, you can look at that set list online. They only played like 6 songs, but you know how the Grateful Dead is. It probably was a 2 or 3 hour set. And then the following year.
What year was that?
July 2nd through 4th, 1969. Sorry, I lied. July 4th and 5th, 1969. The second Atlanta Pop Festival took place in 1970. Following the success of the first festival, this concert included the Allman Brothers, B.B. King, Jethro Tull, Jimi Hendrix, and many others. Georgia Governor Lester Maddox, who attempted to stop the festival ahead of time, now took more legislative action to make sure that there would be no more festivals. So we only got 2 international pop festivals. The Allman Brothers Band. So the Allman Brothers, they're from Jacksonville, but they moved to Macon soon after they formed. But they frequently traveled to Atlanta, and they often played free concerts in Piedmont Park. Most music at the time either came from Britain or they played the psychedelic California sound. But the Allman Brothers combined blues, country, and rock that became greatly influential for later rock bands. This is a game that I like to play. Shout out who you think is the most influential American band. Most influential American band. The Beatles, England.
That's right. Allman Brothers.
Allman Brothers. Okay.
Skinner, but they were.
Skinner were influenced, right? Exactly. So I've got to say, I'm not a big. I'm sorry. Somebody say one more.
I was thinking Creedence Clearwater, but they're probably later than this, are they?
They. I don't know when their first album came out. They were definitely in 1969. But that's a good option. That's something that I like to play in my head because I'll be honest, I'm not a huge Allman Brothers fan at all. With that said, I want to say Jimi Hendrix. He's American, but the band, the label, and you got to start all in England. The Doors is my personal favorite band. I can't say that they were super influential. They still have that California sound. So I always got to fall back that the Allman Brothers arguably is one of the most influential bands, and they came from right here in Georgia.
Now that you mentioned California, what was the group that made this song? The guy just died recently out of California, the California sound. Brian Wilson.
Oh, yeah. Beach
Boys.
Boys.
Oh, the Beach Boys.
Beach Boys.
Good choice. That's still that pop, right? But yeah, really good choice. Actually, I mean, thinking about it, I don't know why I've never really thought of Elvis Presley, but, right. He wasn't in a band, but it was, yeah.
Brothers actually were the pioneers of Southern rock, don't they?
100%, yeah.
Mighty predated Southern rock.
Right, so that's what I was thinking is that Creedence, they were there, CCR, and they of course have that really strong Cajun pronunciation of their words, but aren't they from like?
That's what I was just sitting here getting ready to look up. I just got my purse out to get my phone.
Okay.
Because we sat here going, we were doing the same thing.
Say Little Richard.
Little Richard's a great choice, and Little Richard, he's from Georgia, right?
James Brown.
James Brown. There's a really good book called Something in the Water that talks about music from Macon. It really brings them up there. Shout out whenever you find out where
Looking it up.
CCR is from. I think it's somewhere weird like Illinois or it's definitely not Southern. Draft counselors of Atlanta. So going back to anti-war, Don Bender, he was a Quaker, and he created the draft counselors of Atlanta with the Atlanta Workshop in Nonviolence, AWIN. It trained draft-age men with information and resources should they need to evade the draft. The draft counselors of Atlanta emerged as the preeminent center for draft counseling in the Southeast. The draft board would actually call Quaker House and try to get a better understanding of the rules from them once the updated rules would come out.
So the answer about CCR, unbelievably, they were formed in 1959 in Cerrito, California.
I was doubly wrong with that. I love CCR though, by the way.
El Cerrito. Yeah.
So another sort of, or I guess an aid that came to the strip is the free clinic. So Dr. Joseph Hertel was a Sunday school teacher and a MD in Buckhead who previously acted as the national director of the Red Cross. Did you?
Yeah,
You know if he's still alive?
yeah, I Googled the name, but never, nothing comes up. Not even Dr. Hotel.
Yeah, I was trying to get in contact with him and Bruce Donnelly.
He's considered the drug doctor.
Yeah.
And that's,
Right.
I didn't know he had historical.
He's very important to me. But he was the previous national director of the Red Cross. He knew the 12th Gate, the coffee house that catered to hips, had Christian ties. So he asked Reverend Donnelly if he could do anything to support them.
I'm sorry, you gotta share your slides.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't need to take a picture.
Okay. The result was the city's free clinic that began in Donnelly's office. It was literally a broom closet, basically, but it eventually was located in a former Boy Scout hut. People assumed it was to give out free birth control and to treat drug overdoses. They didn't actually keep a log of what it is that they were treating, but if you look at similar free clinics that existed in San Francisco and elsewhere, we can assume that they did typically treat STDs as well as general infections from open wounds. Take a water break. Other HIP services. Other services existed to help hippies with the potential negativities of the counterculture. These included the Bridge, Quaker House, and Reverend Harkey Kleinfelter's ministry to the street people. The Bridge was basically if kids ran away from home, and I do mean kids, some as young as 11, 12, 13 years old. If they ran away from home and their parents were trying to find them, of course, the police could come out and find them. But the Bridge acted as intermediaries. That's like more of, hey, your parents are looking for you. We're not going to force you to go back there. I don't know what your living situation is, but should you so choose, reach out to us. Quaker House, and of course, aided with anti-war efforts. And Harkey Kleinfelter, he was a minister as well, and he did everything. If somebody was homeless, needed a place to stay, he would be there for you. There's a story that somebody was freaking out on LSD, and he was there to take care of that person. At one point, a couple was living at his house, and their child was sleeping in his desk drawer. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club. So by 1971, the hippie scene on the strip changed to something darker and tougher. They were no longer flower children. This is whenever speed starts becoming more prevalent in the area. This is when heroin starts becoming more prevalent in the area. During the summer of 1970, the Outlaws biker gang began moving into the strip and were known for beating hips to steal their drugs and their money. The Great Speckled Bird, the hippie newspaper, claimed that there was no actual feud between the bikers and the hippies. They said that this was just a myth that was being created by straight society. However, what we do know is that White Columns was a mansion at 238 14th Street. This was in 1971. It was formerly the home of the French consul, and it had since become a commune of at least 17 hippies living in the house. I'm sorry, I lied. It's 1970. In late November, early December 1970, members of the Outlaws robbed hippies at gunpoint in White Columns. 3 days later, more outlaws came and tried to kidnap one of the hippies, who broke away, ran back into the house, and exchanged gunfire with the outlaws.
Yeah, sorry, but they started in Carolina.
I don't know. I can Google real quick.
French and
Yeah, I want to say that they actually started. I've got no internet service really, if somebody else can Google that. So I want to say they're another Midwest group. Yep, Illinois. So just to go back 3 days later, the outlaws came, they tried to kidnap the hippie, and he ran back into the house and started shooting at him. On December 30th, 1970, an outlaw named 𝘗𝘦𝘢𝘕 𝘕𝘬𝘕, because of his eyes, came to the mansion and was shot in the face with a shotgun. Police arrested all 17 residents in the house, and upon searching the house, found 18 firebombs, 7 rifles, 4 pistols, 2 shotguns, and a stick of dynamite. Yeah. So they were all released because the judge said that the area had become so dangerous and so terrible that whatever they did had to have done in self-defense. That's the house right there.
You know if it's still standing?
It is not. There's a building that looks similar, but I've tried looking it up on Google Maps every now and again, and it looks like there's like apartments or condos or something that are built where that was. And as a result of this, hips began moving from the area and into areas such as Virginia Highlands and Little Five Points. And there was never, even though of course Little Five Points has that sort of countercultural feel, it's still not what the strip was during the heyday between, I say, 1967 and 1971. So I wrote or did all my research on really a 3-year period. And I always like to end on this quote by Peter Coyote. Does anybody in here know who Peter Coyote is? Yeah, he's a voice actor. He's an actor. He was an activist. He's a really great guy. He said he was asked about to reflect on the hippie movement and to think about what the legacy of it was or something. And his response is, we did what we did, not because we thought we would win, but because it was the only way we could conceive of being fully human, fully interdependent, and reciprocal with our fellows and the rest of creation. I hope our examples will not go overlooked.
He wasn't based here, right?
No, he wasn't. He was California.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
But I do think this sums up the 3 minutes so well. All right, it is almost 12:45. Do you have any questions for me? I've got a little timeline I can show you. If not, go for it.
What's going on today? Do you believe or do you think that some of the counterculture, hippie culture has, we have MAGA?
Yeah.
Do you think a bunch of what into our country changing was baby boomers and culture that was when the office position? Do you think some of those folks have kind of
Very
run into the
Jared Rubin, he was involved with, oh my God, the very big New Left guy in the American flag jumps, Abby Hoffman. He was very active with him. And then he, once at the 60s ended, he became a business owner and went the total opposite way. So it's always, some people, they start out very far left, become milder as they age, and then go very far the other way.
So you are saying that some have
100%. There's another book called, a book was written in the 60s called The Making of a Counterculture. I don't think it's that great of a book. It's basically saying that hippies emerged out of advertisement for companies like Gap and Buick. I think it's Buick. It's some obscure brand. But anyway, so basically there was a car company. We're going to go with Buick. It wasn't Volkswagen. Saab, I think it was. I think it was Saab. Basically, you have these advertisements in the 50s of, the happy nuclear family driving an American car, and that's what cars are. And then Saab comes out with advertisements that says, hey, that's not your life, is it? No, you're an outsider. You're cool. You deserve to drive an outsider's car, a Saab. And then from there, you get James Dean. You get all these outsider type ideas. And he claims it all comes from there. Where was I going with? Oh, that same author wrote a book called The Making of an Elder Culture. And he addresses that switch that's happened with a lot of people from the era. Go for it.
In all of your research and background and all, how much did you find that the various movements and groups in the various cities or wherever were linked together? Like how much were they influencing each other, or was it all just
Very little.
around?
Very little. So a lot of, there were several situations where people if they were true kids, 16 years old, their family might move to Atlanta, and there was that influence that they started there and then came here. The reverse can be said, people that are from here that wanted to go west and see what the movement was there. But there were no hippie leaders, but there were definitely, they all knew the Beatles. They all knew Timothy Leary. So they had similar influences, but there were no real direct connections. Actually, even locally, there were, several protest groups, but they weren't very interconnected. Harkey Kleinfelter, the Reverend I was talking about, he was active with Dr. Martin Luther King in the early years. This is him right here. By the time the hippies came around, the local civil rights movement, which is of course huge in Atlanta, they didn't want hippies there because their whole thing is that, they were saying that in order to be respected in society, that you have to become active in society. Hippies were saying the exact opposite. You should drop out of society. Civil rights movement was saying that you should stay away from drugs and alcohol. Hippies were saying you should engage in drugs and alcohol. So there was a pretty big split with them. Also, by the end of the 60s, the civil rights movement became very suspicious of especially hippies joining them, because there was that, they could join us and be spies, or they can encourage you to incite violence and have bad actors join the ranks. So yeah, even locally, there was a split between activists. Other questions? Go for it.
Where did you access the Great Speckled Bird?
Georgia State University.
Okay, did they have the whole collection? They have the complete run?
Yep. I thought you were going to say that you were part of it, or so I was hoping a follow-up story with that.
6 publication.
So I'm going to have to Google that. I think it
It's
was
the precursor to creating
it. Actually, Creative Loafing killed it. So I want to say it stopped publication in 71, 73, somewhere in there.
Yes.
And then they came back briefly, and I think they released it for about a year, and it went under. And then they tried releasing it again, I want to say in 1981 or somewhere in there, and they weren't able to gain any steam with it. But the Birds problem was that you had to pay for it. It was something cheap, 15 cents a dollar or whatever. Creative Loafing, they sold to advertisers. That's why there were all the advertisers in the back of it. So they had similar articles, similar concerts, but it was free. Do you want to add something?
Oh, yeah. Do you know where the name Speckled Bird came from? Where did you?
It's a Bible verse, I believe.
Yes.
It's located in all these biblical references.
My thesis was called Slouching Towards Atlanta, the influence of churches on hippie, on the counterculture, because as I'm doing this research, there's this stereotypical mindset that hippies were sort of against organized religion. If they did like religion, it was the more Asian or Eastern or New Age religions. In Atlanta, I mean, the coffee shops was named after a Bible verse. The newspaper was named after a Bible verse. Part of my argument is that the hippie movement would have ended in Atlanta in 1970 had it not been for these services that were all church funded to keep it going. So it is,
It's certainly sort of like a religious commune.
Yeah.
In spirit, anyhow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then there's also this sort of reciprocal thing that happened with not necessarily the mainstream denominations, but you have like Christian rock that emerges out of it. There's also some churches start adopting that more communal hippie dress. Who's the band that did Jesus Is Just All Right with Me? Doobie Brothers, yeah. So you get music like that from it.
one more. I think there was also a song, The Great Speckled, I think it's Roy Acuff.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and so I think, actually, I'm gonna be making it up, but I think he got his start from, or he got the song from the.
Okay, yeah, I don't know where the first.
I was gonna say, wasn't Jesus the original counterculture? He and 12 disciples, I mean. They were radicals. Hey, man, it'll make sense that you got.
Hold on. Sorry. Let's see. Wanted Jesus poster. Vintage 1970 Jesus poster. Let's see if I can pull it up.
Get the point anyhow.
Well, it's even, I made it worse. Anyways, it just basically says wanted for long hair, wearing sandals, operating a dive, loitering, turning water into wine,
Oh, there you go.
hanging out with prostitutes, hanging out with the lower class, and things like that.
Who was it that wrote the song Jesus was the superstar? He ate organic food.
Jesus was a superstar. He ate.
Wait, no, that's not it. That's, I think I could,
You know,
Christopherson?
yeah,
Okay.
Jesus,
Jesus was a Capricorn.
he wore, that was it.
But they were crediting it to John Prine, if you understand me.
Yeah, he ate.
Presence there, missing.
thing I'm interested in is I live in a neighborhood, very near 14th Street, that when I was a child, I learned as an adult that it was redlined. It's a very nice neighborhood now, it's Ansley Park. And a lot of these the bigger houses, you can see signs where they were chopped up into apartments.
Yeah. The Margaret Mitchell house, that's what happened there.
Most likely, yeah, because that was right in the.
Yeah, it was right at 14th and Peachtree. Yeah, so it was, of course, the Margaret Mitchell house. I think it sold in the 30s or so, and they turned it into apartments. And then I've been trying, so the Atlanta History Center does a lot of hippie programs out of the Margaret Mitchell house. I haven't seen anything about people living there. I imagine it was pretty pricey to live there, but yeah, nonetheless, that's exactly what happened in Margaret Mitchell house.
I couldn't understand. I took piano lessons at Ansley Park all through the 60s when the governor's mansion was still there. And I remember wanting to live in that neighborhood because there are all these sidewalks and parks.
Mhm.
I'm like, fuck yeah. And I couldn't understand the reason my parents kept saying we can't. And now I find out, well, unless you can pay cash for a house
Yeah.
in that area, you could buy a house.
And this, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it, but so what was the strip was actually a thriving, like a business center for a long time. And then there was the Atlanta Art School that opened up in the area, and it sort of became more bohemian crowds, and it had that even as early as, I think it was the 50s, early 1960s. Mother David, he was an art student. His art gallery he went to the Atlanta Art School. And then Ansley Mall opened, and that just killed business on the strip, and that made the houses cheaper, that made every businesses go out of business. And then you've got the bohemians, you've got this area that's going down, so the hippies start moving in. Go for it.
Streets of the strip.
It was Peachtree Street. It began at 18th and, I'm sorry, it began at 8th and it ended at 14th. Yes.
You mentioned you talked a lot about timelines at the beginning. And I don't remember where I read this, and it may have been John McMillan, but I've heard people say like the 60s ended in Altamont because they had that horrible incident.
Right.
And I think there were bikers involved, like outlaws or Hell's Angels, maybe. Do you feel like, I don't know, watching your presentation, it seemed like that timeline also sort of matches or correlates with that? Do you feel like that's accurate, or?
I still go because even though Altamont happened, and even though, the Manson murders happened in August 1969, he was arrested in October 1969, and that's people started getting the mindset that, oh, these aren't peace-loving people anymore. So it was the end of 1969. However, you do still have anti-war movements going on. You do still have a lot of activism that's going on. So I think of it more as ending with the 1973 when America started pulling out of the Vietnam War, because that was, one of the big things they were protesting, and it ended. There was also something else that was important I was going to say about I think that Kent State, the shooting, had more of an effect of ending the movement than Altamont did. And Kent State was 1970, 1971.
Did you do any research on the building? I think it was called the Castle across the street from the High Museum.
No.
Restaurant.
I didn't, but my mom tells me stories about it all the time.
Teacher during renovation had to rent out a room there. And I just remember for a few weeks going there and
Yeah.
there was a butcher shop.
Didn't hear that part.
Very strange. It is strange.
Yeah.
That is very.
She always told me that was a place that I needed to research and try to include in it, but to be honest, I don't know whatever happened with it in my research.
It's still there.
Right.
In fact, in my opinion, that's what ignited the reservation movement in Atlanta. It was about to be torn down, and Andrew Young referred to it as hunk of junk, and people just got inflamed, and it was a sort of a rallying cry. And it's still there.
Yeah.
But it's a Mediterranean restaurant. But I'd be fascinated to know if you could find some art history.
Yeah. Be my next project.
Did that predate the Fox, the rally to save the Fox?
Which,
Because I don't think the castle probably wasn't on people's radar yet. Yeah, I don't think the castle was on the people's radar yet. The Fox.
Yeah,
was-
because when Andrew Young was
The
mayor.
Fox was the big dog.
Fox was saved before Andrew Young.
That's right. The Fox would have been in the early 70s. That's right. And that was basically because citizens, rallied and didn't want, it was going to be torn down for a parking lot. Most people probably know that. And so that's also very often identified as when the preservation line was drawn.
Yeah, you're right.
And the castle would have been, the castle was actually built in the mid 1800s by a Civil War veteran officer, I think. And there's still some beautiful stuff on the interior there, even through all the things it's been through. Most recently, it was in private ownership, and they were trying to build a private club there.
Yeah,
I don't know if that ever took off. I don't think so. I think that's how it got to the restaurant phase now, maybe.
public part of the bar, and I asked them about what's the deal on membership. And the lady said, well, we're seeking members that with a certain vibe. I said, I'm not your guy.
And they were looking for their current members to invite the new members that would have the right vibe, I think, because I had several conversations during that time period with the owner. And so, yeah.
Advertising rooms that you could rent.
Yeah, I met him through the Preservation Center is how I knew who he was. So anyway, yeah, interesting times down there, but it is still a beautiful
It's amazing.
building inside.
Yes, ma'am.
Speak to anything about underground Atlanta during the later part of this. Kid.
So, what about it? So underground Atlanta, I forgot when it got started, but it did have a lot of, there was a Mullenbrinks that was over there, and that was among where they started having more music clubs that were going on down there. But as for an actual countercultural tie, I'm really not sure of one. Although I do think Alex Cooley had something to do with one of the businesses that were down there. Actually, I did a lot of research for, it was the old Masquerade building in Atlanta, 695 North Avenue. And they have ties even before, so it currently exists in underground Atlanta, but it actually had ties as early as the 80s and 90s there. And the people that founded Mellow Mushroom, they actually had, let me stop because I might be making some of that. I think they had a shop that was down there, or Piano Red, who used to play at Molenbrinks. He started playing for the brother. No, yeah, I did make that entire thing up. I'm sorry. Piano Red played at Molenbrinks that was in underground Atlanta. And then the brothers that created Mellow Mushroom created a very nice restaurant that was at where the Masquerade became at 695 North Avenue. And Piano Red was the house player that was there. That's really the extent of my
Excelsior Mill.
the Excelsior Mill restaurant. That's right. Yeah. That's really the extent of
It was an Excelsior Mill.
exactly. Yeah, it was owned by Peachtree for at the very start of it.
To study this particular thing?
So my mom, I grew up with the music with her. She was a huge Beatles fan, and particularly Sgt. Pepper's. And to me, that was just always old music. I never really liked it. And then in 8th grade, I started getting into the Doors. I started reading Hunter S. Thompson. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas became my favorite movie. And then whenever I got to college, you're supposed to start fine-tuning what your research area is with history. And all these years that I was listening to that music, it never really hit me until college that, these songs, they actually have a purpose in them. And so it was the music that really got me into the era. Any other questions? I'm going to do a
You want to share slides, and it's just kid couldn't come. He wanted to, and asked if this was being recorded.
It's being recorded. I can give you my card if you want to email me, unless you somehow email it to you. And
It'll be on our website in about a week.
Okay, perfect.
Full recording should be set.
All right, I'm going to do a shameless self-plug real quick. So I do work at the Georgia Room at Switzer Library. We are doing a 50th anniversary Vietnam Veterans panel on Saturday, October 18th, if you would like to go and see that. We're also Jeff Clemens, he's the director of the Westview Cemetery. He's coming and giving a talk about riches in December. All right.
You